My name is Clara Wren, and the first time I saw him run, I thought the ground itself might split apart. The field stretched wide and empty beneath the storm's low belly, the kind of gray that swallows color whole. Wind scraped against the barn roof, rattling the loose tin, and my breath came out in white, trembling clouds. I had told myself that bringing him here was a good idea, that I could handle him, fix him, quiet whatever rage lived inside. But as the first rumble of thunder broke open the sky, I realized how foolish that was. Riven didn't belong to anyone. He wasn't a horse, so much as a force of nature black as wet ash, muscles rippling with something between terror and fury. The man who'd sold him to me said he was spirited. What he meant was broken. Years of neglect had left him half-starved, eyes too sharp for trust. But I had looked at those eyes and seen something else, something I recognized too easily. A thing that wouldn't bend, no matter how much the world tried to crush it. Now, as the rain began to fall, that thing stood before me, shaking the earth with every movement. I held the lead rope in my gloved hands. My palms were slick with sweat under the leather. "Easy," I whispered, but my voice disappeared in the wind. He jerked his head, ears flat, nostrils wide. One sharp breath, and he reared, front hooves cutting through air that smelled like rain and rust. I stumbled back, the rope burning across my skin. For a moment, his dark shape loomed above me, framed by lightning, beautiful, terrible, alive. And then he ran. The rope slipped from my fingers. His hooves tore across the wet grass, mud exploding behind him. The sound was deafening thunder from the ground. I screamed his name, though it wasn't really his name. It was just a word I'd given him, hoping it might mean something one day. But he didn't look back. Not once. He didn't stop. He didn't even slow down. The fence at the far end of the field shattered under his weight. Wooden splinters scattered through the rain like flying bones. He was gone before I could breathe again, swallowed by the forest that bordered the property. And there I was alone, soaked, shaking, with the useless end of a rope dangling from my hand. It took me a long time to move. The rain came down harder, washing away the mud on my boots, the salt on my lips. Somewhere in the distance, a hawk screamed. I felt like something inside me had been ripped open, something I'd been holding together with nothing but stubbornness. That was the day I stopped pretending that I was fine. I came to this place 2 months ago, a farmhouse too old to be charming, too quiet to be comforting. The wallpaper peeled like dried skin, and the pipes groaned with every breath of wind. But it was mine. My name on the deed, my hands rebuilding the fences, my silence filling the rooms. I told everyone I'd moved to start over. The truth was simpler. I was hiding from the city, from the man who used to tell me I was too much and not enough in the same breath, from the noise that wouldn't stop echoing inside my skull. Out here, I thought I could breathe again. Out here, I thought I could heal. Then came Riven. He arrived in a trailer that looked too small for the weight of his anger. The driver, a man with a cigarette glued to his lip, warned me before opening the gate. "He's got a mind of his own," he said. "Watch yourself." I'd smiled, pretending I wasn't terrified. So do I. When Riven stepped off the ramp, he didn't hesitate. He didn't look around or sniff the air. He just stared straight at me, eyes like burning coals under his wet mane. I remember thinking he looked like something the storm dragged in. In the weeks that followed, he refused everything: food, touch, the halter, the world itself. He would circle the paddock for hours, never letting me close. His body carried old scars, thin and white along his ribs, but it was the unseen wounds that bled the most. Every morning, I stood by the fence with an apple in my hand. Every morning, he turned away. It became a ritual, me waiting, him refusing. I started talking to him just to fill the silence. I told him about the city lights that never dimmed, about the way I used to stare at myself in mirrors until I couldn't recognize who I was. I told him about the day I packed everything I owned into the back of my car and drove until the radio lost signal. He never answered, but I swear he listened. Sometimes I caught him watching me through the slats of the stall door, ears twitching, breath steady, eyes dark but not as hard as before. In those moments, I felt a strange kind of peace, as if the world had narrowed down to 2 broken creatures circling each other, both too scared to make the first move. But peace never lasts long, not for people like me, not for horses like him. The day he ran was the day I pushed too hard. I'd been working with him in the round pen, slow circles under a gray sky. The air felt thick, like the world was holding its breath. I told myself we were making progress. His ears were turned toward me, his steps more measured. But when I asked him to stop, he didn't. When I called again, louder, he tossed his head and quickened his pace. Something in me snapped. "Stop!" I yelled. The word tore through the air, sharp and panicked. And that's when he broke free. He hit the gate like a wave hitting a wall. The latch gave way with a sound that made my stomach twist. Then he was gone faster than I'd ever seen anything move. By the time I reached the broken fence line, my lungs burned, my hair stuck to my face, and my boots sank deep into the mud. The rain blurred everything into motion. I could barely see him through it, but I could hear him hooves striking the earth, breath cutting through the wind. I kept running, though I knew I couldn't catch him. Not really. When I reached the forest edge, I stopped. The trees swallowed the sound of him, leaving only the storm and my heartbeat. My throat ached from shouting his name. My hands trembled so violently I had to press them against my chest just to feel something solid. I wanted to be angry. I wanted to curse him, to curse myself. But all I could feel was recognition, because I knew what it meant to run that way, to tear through everything that tried to contain you, to keep going, even when you didn't know what you were running from. So I stood there in the rain, staring into the dark woods and whispered, "I get it." That night, I sat on the porch long after the storm had passed. The world smelled like wet leaves and earth. My coffee had gone cold in my hands. I replayed the image of him breaking free over and over. Every sound and motion burned into my mind. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw flashes Riven's mane whipping through the rain, the sound of splintering wood, the look in his eyes right before he ran. It wasn't rage, it was fear. And maybe I was the thing he was afraid of. I went to the barn in the middle of the night, barefoot, wrapped in an old blanket. The lantern light cast trembling shadows across the stalls. The emptiness was unbearable. The air still carried his scent: hay, sweat, thunder. I stood in front of the empty stall door and touched the rough wood. "You're not the only one who can't stop," I whispered. The silence answered me. Morning came pale and brittle. The storm had left the fields glittering with puddles. I walked the fence line until I found where he'd broken through. The tracks led into the forest deep, erratic, panicked. I followed them for a while, but the mud gave way to pine needles and fallen leaves. The trail vanished. I wanted to believe he was alive, that he'd found open space somewhere beyond the trees. By noon, I was sitting on the edge of the pasture, my jeans soaked, staring at nothing. The quiet pressed against me like a weight. Somewhere nearby, a crow called. The world felt both too big and too small at once. That's when I realized how much I needed him to come back. It wasn't about responsibility or money or failure. It was about the space he'd filled without meaning to. The strange, wordless understanding that had begun between us. I couldn't stand the thought of that silence, returning of losing the only thing that reflected me so clearly. He didn't return that day, or the next. By the third morning, I stopped expecting him to. I went through the motions, feeding the chickens, fixing the fence, pretending not to look toward the woods. I told myself I was learning to let go. I told myself that maybe freedom was what he needed. But late that evening, as the sun sank behind the hills, I heard it. A single, distant sound, hoofbeats. Faint but steady. I froze. The world seemed to hold its breath. Then, through the fading light, I saw him. He emerged from the trees like a shadow taking shape. Mud streaked his sides, his mane tangled, one leg scraped and bleeding, but his eyes were the same, wild, alive, and watching me. For a long time, neither of us moved. I didn't call his name. I didn't step forward. I just stood there, heart hammering, afraid that one wrong move would send him away again. Finally, he lowered his head and took a step toward me, then another. The air between us felt electric. When he stopped a few feet away, I saw the tremor in his shoulders, the shallow rise and fall of his chest. He was exhausted, terrified, free. I wanted to reach for him, but I didn't. I just whispered, "You came back." And for the first time, I thought he heard me. He didn't let me touch him that night. He walked along the fence line, circling, restless. But he stayed. That was enough. In the days that followed, I started to understand something I hadn't before. Riven wasn't running from me. He was running because of me, because I was still carrying the same fear he felt, only mine had nowhere to go. I tried to hold it all in, to keep moving, to stay strong, composed, silent. But healing doesn't come from control. It comes from surrender. And I was nowhere near ready to surrender. Each morning, I stood by the fence again. This time, I didn't bring an apple. I just stood there, breathing. Sometimes he came close. Sometimes he didn't. But slowly, the distance began to shrink. One afternoon, as the wind moved through the grass, I reached out my hand. He didn't move away. His muzzle brushed my fingertips, warm and soft. It lasted only a second, but it was enough to make my chest ache. For the first time in months, I felt something break open inside me, not like a wound, but like light through a crack. The next storm came a week later. The sky turned heavy again, thick with that same metallic scent. I felt the air change before the clouds even darkened. Every nerve in my body screamed that history was about to repeat itself. Riven sensed it too. He paced the paddock, ears flicking, muscles tense. The wind carried the memory of the first storm between us. I could see it in his eyes, the urge to run, the pull of the wild. This time, I didn't grab the rope, I didn't shout. I just stepped into the field and stood still. "Go if you have to," I said softly. He froze. The rain began to fall, slow and deliberate. For a heartbeat, everything hung in silence, the world, the storm, my breath. Then he did something I didn't expect. He didn't run. He took a step closer. The thunder rolled overhead, but neither of us moved. The storm broke open, wind screaming through the grass, water soaking us both. And there we stood, two creatures caught between fear and freedom, neither willing to let go just yet. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was trying to control him. I wasn't trying to fix him. I was just with him. And maybe that's where healing begins, not in the stopping, but in the stillness that comes when you finally stop trying to make sense of the wild. I didn't know it then, but that was the moment everything started to change. Because the horse who wouldn't stop was the part of me that couldn't either. And I was finally beginning to listen. The rain kept falling long after the thunder left. It came soft and endless, the kind of rain that erases everything it touches. My hair clung to my face, my clothes heavy and cold against my skin, but I didn't move. Riven's breath came slow and uneven beside me. He stood only a few feet away, head lowered, the rhythm of his breathing matching mine. For a long time, neither of us dared to break that fragile peace. The storm was supposed to end us another round of chaos, another collapse. But something had shifted. I could feel it in the air between us, that invisible thread I'd been too blind to see before. It wasn't trust, not yet, it was recognition. I took a step forward. He didn't flinch. Another step, slower this time. His ears twitched, but he stayed. I reached out my hand, palm up. The world held still. When his muzzle touched my fingers, everything inside me went silent. His breath was warm, damp from the rain. The contact lasted only a heartbeat before he pulled away, shaking the water from his mane. But that heartbeat felt endless. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding and lowered my hand. I didn't need more. I'd already been given everything I'd been asking for. He didn't run again. Not that night. When I turned back toward the barn, he followed me halfway. Close enough to make me aware of his presence, far enough to remind me that this wasn't surrender. This was something gentler, a truce. The next morning, the air smelled like wet grass and morning fog. The storm had scoured the world clean, leaving the fields shining silver under the sun. I barely slept, but my body hummed with a quiet energy. When I stepped outside, Riven was already waiting near the fence. He watched me with that same unreadable stillness, the kind that made me feel like he saw more than I wanted to show. There were cuts on his legs from the fence, and a shallow bruise along his shoulder, reminders of the night he broke free. But he stood tall, proud, defiant as ever. I walked toward him slowly, boots squelching in the mud. "You're still here," I said, my voice almost breaking on the words. The wind stirred his mane, and he blinked. Slow and deliberate. I don't know why it made me cry. Maybe because no one else ever stayed when things got hard. Maybe because I'd spent so long convincing myself that I didn't need anyone too. But there he was, a creature who owed me nothing, standing quietly, waiting for me to meet him halfway. That morning was the first time he ate from my hand. The days that followed blurred together like watercolors. Every morning, I woke before dawn, my body already aching with anticipation. I fed him, brushed the dried mud from his coat, spoke to him about nothing, the weather, the fences that needed mending, the quiet ache that sat behind my ribs. He still startled easily, but he no longer turned away when I approached. Sometimes I caught him watching me when he thought I wasn't looking. His gaze wasn't the wild, defensive stare it once was. It was softer now, curious. It unnerved me, that kind of attention. It was the same way people used to look at me before I fell apart, when they still thought I could be fixed. I didn't want to be fixed. I just wanted to understand why I'd broken in the first place. Riven didn't ask for explanations. He didn't demand I talk about my past or pretend it didn't exist. He just breathed beside me, his silence steady and grounding. And slowly, that silence began to change something in me. But healing never comes without pain. The third week after the storm, something inside me started unraveling again. Maybe it was the quiet. Maybe it was the realization that I was still trapped inside my own walls. Whatever it was, it came on sudden and sharp. That evening, I went to the barn later than usual. The sun was setting, and the sky was painted in blood and gold. Riven paced inside the paddock, restless, ears flicking. He'd been calmer the last few days, but something about that night felt different, tense, expectant. When I entered, he snorted and stomped, circling once before stopping near the gate. His muscles twitched under his coat like live wires. "It's okay," I said softly, but my voice carried the lie. It wasn't okay, not for him, not for me. I'd had a message earlier, my ex, finding another way to seep back into my life. Just a few words, but they cracked something open. "Hope you're doing better. I always wanted what was best for you. The kind of cruelty that hides behind kindness." I told myself I didn't care, but the words followed me like ghosts. I'd come out here to escape them, but they clung to me like smoke. Riven must have felt it, the tightness in my chest, the unspoken rage. He started pacing again, snorting, tail flicking hard. "Stop," I whispered, but he didn't. "Stop," I said louder, stepping closer. He threw his head, eyes rolling white. The rope slipped through my fingers. "Riven!" He bolted. Not through the fence this time, just around me, faster and faster, his hooves pounding the earth. Mud flew, the sound of his breathing rough and panicked. The sight hit me like déjà vu. I was right back in that first storm, powerless, begging something wild to listen. But this time, something inside me broke differently. I screamed. Not at him, at everything. At the memories, the silence, the months I'd spent swallowing my voice just to keep the peace. The sound tore out of me before I could stop it. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't sane. It was raw, animal, desperate. And when it was done, when my throat was on fire and the tears had already mixed with the dirt on my face, Riven stopped. He froze mid-step, chest heaving, his ears flicking toward me. The silence after was unbearable. I fell to my knees, mud soaking into my jeans, my breath coming in shuddering gasps. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I didn't mean..." He took a step toward me. I thought he would run again. But he didn't. Instead, he came closer, slow and deliberate, until his shadow covered me. I looked up, and for the first time, he lowered his head toward mine close enough that I could feel the warmth of his breath against my cheek. I didn't move. I couldn't. He stayed there, silent, breathing with me until my own breathing found its rhythm again. That was the night I understood that sometimes things stop not because you force them to, but because you finally stop fighting yourself. After that night, something changed between us. The mornings felt different, quieter, deeper. Riven followed me along the fence line when I walked the field. He started meeting me halfway, the space between us shrinking little by little. He began to let me touch him. Not always. Some days, he still pulled away, his instincts stronger than his trust. But when he stayed, it felt like standing inside a secret. The warmth of his body, the slow rise and fall of his breath, it anchored me in ways I didn't know I needed. I started sleeping again. Not well, but enough. The nightmares that used to drag me awake in the dark faded into softer shapes. I'd wake before dawn and go outside, watching the fog lift over the hills. Sometimes, Riven would already be there, his silhouette emerging from the mist like something half-remembered. He became the rhythm of my days. Feed, brush, breathe, repeat. There was comfort in the repetition, a kind of peace in knowing what came next. But peace can be a fragile thing. It makes you believe you're safe just long enough to forget how easily the world can shatter. It was early October when the world cracked again. The mornings had turned cold, the fields rimmed with frost. The air had that quiet, expectant stillness that comes before winter. Riven had grown stronger, his coat thick and glossy. I'd begun working him on the lunge line, slow, steady circles, rebuilding trust step by step. That day started like any other. The sun low, the world soft. He moved beautifully, muscles smooth under his skin. His ears flicked toward my voice every time I called his name. And then, a sudden sound, a truck backfiring on the road beyond the trees. In an instant, the peace shattered. Riven's head shot up, nostrils flaring. His eyes went wide, wild again, that familiar terror flooding back. I called to him soft, steady, but he didn't hear me. He pulled hard. The line snapped from my hand before I could react. Riven! He bolted toward the fence, the same direction he had the first time. The same speed, the same desperation. For a heartbeat, I froze. The sound of his hooves filled the air, thunder rolling across the field. And then I ran. The cold air burned my lungs, my legs heavy in the frost. I stumbled once, caught myself, kept going. He was already halfway across the pasture, the world a blur of motion and panic. Riven, stop! I screamed. Please stop! He didn't. The fence loomed ahead. My heart slammed against my ribs. Don't do it, I whispered, even though he couldn't hear. He reached it, and this time, he didn't crash through. He stopped. The suddenness of it made me fall to my knees, breathless. His chest heaved, steam rising from his body in the cold air. His tail flicked once, his eyes still wide, but he hadn't gone. He'd chosen to stop. I sat there in the mud, shaking, tears cutting clean lines down my face. Thank you, I whispered, though I wasn't sure who I was thanking him or whatever piece of myself had stopped running long enough to let me see him. I stayed there until my breathing slowed, until the sound of his hooves became the sound of my heartbeat. When I finally stood, he turned his head toward me, and something in his eyes was different, not wild anymore, but tired, vulnerable. It struck me then that trust isn't about control at all. It's about exhaustion. It's what happens when you're too tired to keep fighting. I knew that feeling. I walked to him slowly. When I reached him, I rested my hand against his neck. His skin was hot, damp with sweat. He didn't flinch. For the first time, I didn't try to lead him anywhere. I just stood there, both of us breathing in the cold morning air, our bodies still trembling from the run that almost was. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about him, about the way he'd stopped on his own. It haunted me, that choice, because I realized I'd never done that for myself. Every time life pushed me, I ran into work, into people who hurt me, into silence. I never stopped long enough to face the thing chasing me. Maybe that's why I'd been drawn to him in the first place. He was everything I couldn't control. And maybe what I needed wasn't control at all. Maybe it was surrender. But surrender terrified me. The weeks after that blurred into a rhythm of fragile progress. Riven let me saddle him for the first time. He tensed when I tightened the girth, but he didn't pull away. I didn't ride him yet. I wasn't ready, and neither was he. But the act itself felt monumental, like setting a foundation for something we both still feared to build. At night, I'd sit by the barn door, lantern light flickering against the walls, listening to the sound of him shifting in his stall. It was strange how that sound comforted me, the scrape of hooves, the slow rhythm of his breathing. Sometimes, I'd talk to him through the wooden slats. About the city. About the man who'd broken me down until I stopped recognizing myself. About how I thought leaving would fix everything, but how silence had only made the noise inside me louder. He never made a sound, but somehow I felt heard. One night, as the wind rattled the barn doors, I said it out loud, the thing I'd been afraid to admit. I thought if I could fix you, I whispered, maybe I could fix me too. The lantern flickered. Riven shifted in his stall, turning his head toward my voice. His eyes caught the light dark and endless and soft all at once. And in that moment, I understood something simple and devastating. He didn't need fixing, and neither did I. We just needed time to remember how to stop running. The first frost came early that year. The mornings turned sharp, breath visible in the air. The fields glittered under thin sheets of ice. Everything felt quieter, like the world was holding its breath again, waiting for something to happen. And something did. Late one evening, I heard a noise outside, sharp, metallic. I went to the window and saw the pasture gate swinging open. Panic surged through me. I ran for my boots, grabbed a flashlight, and stepped into the freezing dark. The beam of light cut through the mist. Riven was nowhere near the barn. My stomach dropped. Then I heard it, the uneven rhythm of hooves against the hard ground. "Riven!" I shouted, voice echoing across the fields. The sound came from the lower pasture. I followed it, heart pounding, mud sucking at my boots. And there he was. He stood by the stream that cut along the edge of the property, one hoof in the water, sides heaving. He was trembling, but not from cold. The moonlight caught his breath in silver clouds. He'd escaped again. But he hadn't gone far. I approached slowly, each step careful, deliberate. My flashlight beam flickered across his coat, catching the faint scars, the dried mud, the glint of his eyes. "You're okay," I said softly. "You're okay, I'm here." He turned his head toward me, his ears flicked back, uncertain. I lowered the flashlight, let the darkness take over. The only sound was the water moving over stones. "I'm sorry," I whispered, "for trying to make you stop when I didn't know how to." The wind moved between us, cold and clean. Then, slowly, Riven took a step forward. The water rippled around his legs. Another step. When he reached me, I didn't reach out. I just stood there, breathing the same cold air, feeling the weight of everything we'd been carrying, his fear, my guilt, all of it dissolving into the night. For the first time, I didn't want to fix or control or force anything. I just wanted to be there. And that was enough. The moon slid out from behind a cloud, silvering the world. I looked at him, at the wildness still flickering behind his calm, and thought maybe healing isn't a straight line. Maybe it's a circle, a constant turning back until you finally face yourself. Riven exhaled, long and deep, the sound almost human. And in that moment, I realized he wasn't the only one learning to stop. He was teaching me how. The night after the frost, the air turned to glass. You could almost hear it crack when you breathed. Riven stayed close to the fence, his breath curling through the dark like smoke. I stayed awake in the house, watching from the window as the moon fell lower over the field. Something in me couldn't rest. It wasn't fear anymore. It was something gentler. An ache, maybe, or a quiet understanding that the story we were writing together was about to change. When the first light touched the horizon, I put on my coat and stepped outside. The ground crunched under my boots, the grass brittle with frost. Riven lifted his head when he saw me. "Morning," I said softly, my voice misting in the air. He blinked slowly, ears tilting toward me. There was no panic, no distance, no storm. Just the sound of the world holding still between us. That morning, I saddled him again. My hands moved slower than usual, careful, steady. The air smelled like leather and hay, and the faint sweetness of his breath. I could feel his warmth through the cold, see the rise and fall of his ribs as he waited for me to finish. The first time I'd put the saddle on him, I'd been trembling, terrified he'd throw me, terrified of what it would mean if he did. But this time, I wasn't afraid. I wasn't even sure what I felt, only that it was quiet. When I placed the bridle over his head, he lowered it willingly. The soft click of the bit echoed in the still air. He stood perfectly still, and for a long time I just watched the steam rise off his back, the tiny flecks of frost melting from his mane. "I'm ready if you are," I whispered. Maybe I said it to him. Maybe I said it to myself. I didn't ride him that morning. I just walked beside him through the frost-dusted field, my hand brushing his neck. Every sound was amplified, the crunch of hooves, the soft huff of breath, the faint whisper of wind through dead grass. There was a kind of reverence in the quiet. The world felt thin, fragile, as if it could shatter if I spoke too loudly. When we reached the edge of the pasture, I stopped. The forest beyond looked like smoke, bare branches reaching into a pale sky. I could feel him watching it too. The place he had run to. The place he'd always gone when things got too much. I touched his neck, felt the pulse beneath his skin. "Not today," I said softly. He didn't move. Instead, he leaned his head ever so slightly toward me, and for the first time, I didn't feel like I was standing next to a wild thing. I felt like I was standing next to an equal, something that had seen the same kind of darkness and found its way through. I didn't know it then, but that would be the last calm morning for a while. The storm came 3 days later. It started with a wind that wouldn't stop, cold, hollow, crawling through every crack in the walls. By nightfall, the sky turned black and heavy. Rain came sideways, hammering against the windows. The barn creaked under the force of it. I should have been inside. I should have waited it out. But storms never let me rest. They stirred something in me I couldn't control. The memory of that first night still burned under my skin, the sight of him breaking free, the sound of the fence giving way. So I put on my boots and went out anyway. The rain hit like shards of glass, stinging my face. The wind roared so loud it drowned my heartbeat. I fought my way across the yard, pushing through sheets of rain until the barn loomed ahead. Its door rattled like something alive. When I slid it open, Riven was already pacing. His eyes flashed in the lantern light, his breath coming fast. "Hey," I called over the storm. "It's okay. It's just the wind." But it wasn't just the wind. It was the past, the sound, the smell, the feeling of every moment he'd ever been trapped. He moved faster, his muscles twitching under his skin, every instinct telling him to run. I stepped inside, closing the door behind me. The sound dimmed, but not by much. The barn walls trembled. The storm pressed against us like a living thing. "Riven," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Look at me." He stopped for half a heartbeat, then kept pacing. His hooves struck the ground, quick and sharp. The lantern swung above us, throwing shadows across his body. I moved closer. "You're not alone," I said. "Not this time." I wasn't sure if he heard me, but I kept talking anyway. The words came out broken, trembling, raw. "I know what it's like to feel trapped, to feel like if you don't run, you'll disappear." "I know." My throat tightened. The smell of rain and straw filled the air. He turned toward me, eyes wide, nostrils flaring. Lightning flashed through the cracks in the boards, painting him silver for an instant. And then the thunder came. The sound cracked through the barn, deep and violent. Riven reared, the chain on his halter snapping free. He bolted. The door burst open, wind howling through the gap. I screamed his name, but the storm swallowed the sound. By the time I reached the door, he was already a blur of motion, vanishing into the rain. I ran after him. The night became a blur of wind and water. I couldn't see more than a few feet ahead, my flashlight beam bouncing off the sheets of rain. The mud sucked at my boots, the cold biting through my coat. "Riven!" I shouted. My voice was raw, barely audible over the storm. For a long time, there was nothing. Only the sound of the rain and the rush of water in the ditches overflowing along the fields. Then I saw a flicker of movement near the tree line. I stumbled forward, slipping in the mud. My flashlight caught his shape for a split second. Dark, wild, beautiful even now. He was running along the fence line, just like the first night, following the same path, as if trapped in memory. "Stop!" I screamed, my voice breaking. He didn't. He crashed through the corner of the fence, the sound splintering through the rain. I followed, the wood scraping my arm, my lungs on fire. He was heading toward the river, the same river that ran along the edge of the property, the same river I'd found him standing in weeks ago, trembling in the moonlight. Only this time it was swollen with rain, wild and violent. "Riven!" I shouted again, but my voice was swallowed by thunder. When I reached the bank, I saw him in the shallows, water surging around his legs. He was shaking, his head thrown high, eyes wide with panic. Every muscle in him screamed to run, but there was nowhere left to go. I stopped a few meters away, breathless, soaked to the bone. The rain came down so hard it blurred everything into motion. For a moment, I didn't move. I just watched him, every line of his body, every tremor, every breath that looked like pain. Then, slowly, I stepped forward. The mud sucked at my boots, the river spray cold against my skin. I kept my hands visible, my voice low, steady, the same tone I'd used the day he first came back. "It's okay," I whispered. "You don't have to run anymore." He jerked his head, snorting, water flying from his mane. The river roared louder, rising higher around his legs. "Listen to me," I said louder now. "You're safe. I'm not here to stop you. I'm just here." I took another step, then another, until the water reached my knees. My hands were shaking, but I didn't care. I kept my eyes on his. The lightning flashed again, and in that brief burst of light, I saw myself reflected in him, soaked, terrified, but unbroken. "I ran too," I said quietly. "For years. Every time something hurt, I ran until I couldn't breathe. Until I didn't know who I was anymore." He didn't move, but his ears flicked toward me. The rain hammered down, relentless. I thought stopping meant losing, I said, but maybe it just means being brave enough to stay. The river surged again, cold and merciless. I reached out my hand. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then Riven took a single step forward. The current hit his chest, spraying white water around us. I could see his muscles quivering, every instinct in him screaming to flee. But he didn't. He stayed. I lowered my hand, let the rain fill the silence between us. The sound of it softened, or maybe I just stopped hearing it. The world faded until there was only him, breathing in front of me, trembling but still standing. Then, slowly, so slowly I thought I was imagining it, he lowered his head. He pressed his muzzle against my shoulder. The warmth of him hit me all at once, solid, real, alive. The contact broke something open inside me, something I didn't know I'd been holding together for years. My breath came out in a shudder, and I pressed my hand to his neck, feeling the pulse of him under my palm. "It's okay," I whispered again, though maybe I was saying it to both of us. "You're okay." We stayed like that for a long time, rain falling around us, river churning at our feet, the storm raging on as if it had nothing left to destroy. And then, as suddenly as it had come, it began to fade. The thunder rolled into the distance. The rain softened to a whisper. The clouds tore open, revealing a sky bruised and pale. I turned my face upward, let the cold drops hit my skin, and laughed quiet, broken, but free. Riven stayed beside me, his breath steady now, his head still resting against my shoulder. When the sun broke through, its light caught the water on his coat, turning him silver. He looked almost unreal, like something reborn. By the time we walked back to the barn, the world was washed clean. The fences were broken again, the pasture torn up, but I didn't care. Every step felt lighter. Riven walked beside me, not ahead, not behind, just there, matching me. When we reached the gate, I stopped and looked back. The field stretched wide and open, the air thick with the scent of rain. "You did it," I said softly. "You stopped." He snorted, flicking his ears as if to remind me that he'd never been the only one running. I smiled through the ache in my chest. "Yeah," I whispered. We both did. Winter came early that year. The first snow fell 2 weeks later, thin, hesitant flakes that melted the moment they touched the ground. Riven's coat grew thicker, darker, his breath turning to mist in the morning air. I spent most of my days fixing what the storm had broken, mending fences, replacing boards, repairing the roof. But I didn't mind the work. There was peace in it now, a rhythm I didn't need to control. Every evening, I'd find him waiting near the gate. Sometimes, I'd just stand beside him and watch the sun sink behind the hills. Other times, I'd rest my forehead against his neck and breathe in the smell of hay and wind and something that felt like forgiveness. He didn't need a lead rope anymore. He didn't even need the fence most days. When I opened the gate, he stayed. Not because I told him to, but because he chose to. I remember one morning near the end of December. The sky was pink and white, the air biting. I stood by the barn door, watching him graze near the far fence. The snow made everything glow. When he lifted his head, our eyes met across the distance. For a moment, I saw it all: the first storm, the broken fences, the river, the nights of silence and fear. And then it was gone, replaced by something simple and vast. I walked out to meet him. The snow crunched underfoot, the cold slicing clean through the morning air. When I reached him, I placed a hand against his shoulder. He didn't move, didn't startle, just breathed, steady and calm. The sun broke through the clouds, catching the frost on his mane, turning it to fire. I thought of how far we'd come, not in distance, but in stillness. He didn't stop because I told him to. I murmured, my breath fogging between us. Riven's ear twitched toward me. He stopped because I finally did. The wind stirred, gentle, carrying the scent of snow and cedar, and for the first time in a long, long while, I felt the quiet settle inside me, not empty, not fearful, but full. The kind of quiet that comes when you finally stop running from yourself. Riven exhaled, slow and deep, the sound soft enough to be mistaken for a sigh. I leaned against him, closed my eyes, and let the warmth of him steady me. The world around us was still, the fences mended, the sky wide open. The horse who wouldn't stop stood beside the woman who finally could. And together, in the soft breath of winter morning, we began again.